Hello and welcome to Think Like a Game Designer. I'm your host, Justin Gary. In this podcast, I'll be having conversations with brilliant game designers from across the industry with a goal of finding universal principles that anyone can apply in their creative life. You could find episodes and more at thinklikeagamedesigner.com. In today's episode, I speak with Kohji Nagata. He has worn many hats throughout his career, from software developer, podcast creator, to musician, to one of the co-founders and head of design at Parallel Studios, where he has launched the Parallel TCG, as well as other games that have gone to achieve levels of success that I think even surprised him. At one point being valued at $500 million. This is a Web3 TCG that has done a lot of things right and is continuing to evolve by the frontier of what Web3 gaming, AI technology, as well as classic TCG play can bring to the table for the modern gamer. And we dive into a lot of really great subjects here. We start at a very deep philosophical level. We talk about how do you deal with success, and how do you deal with fear of failure, and how do you deal with the consistent concern that what you're doing is not good enough, and the focus on what needs to be improved, and how can that drive you, and how can that set you back, and how do you handle it. And then we go into a very deep dive into TCG mechanics, the trade-offs of different resource systems, the systems of mana versus leveling up in SoulForge Fusion versus playing and discarding cards for resources, and the trade-offs of those. If you are a TCG designer, or if you love TCGs, that section in the middle of the podcast is going to be for you. Then we start going into AI development and their recently announced game Colony AI, which they dub a 1.5 player game, where the AI is kind of playing in the background and you can jump in and give them advice and help suggest different paths. It's currently in development. We talk about what makes those games successful, how AI is transforming the world of gaming. We talk about how the stickiness of games like this isn't so much about the game loop, but it is about the characters, and how closed systems and designing characters in a way that is more scripted and reactive, like in a game like Baldur's Gate, versus one that's a little bit more open and reactive, where AI is allowing some more flexibility, and how that compares with things like roguelike games that are algorithmically generated. We deep dive into all of that stuff. And so there's a lot of meaty stuff here, whether you are just kind of an entrepreneur or just getting started. The philosophy section at the beginning is for you. If you really want to understand what makes TCGs tick, the middle section is for you. And for anybody that's facing, developing, and creating things in the near future, understanding AI is for you. So Kohji and I clearly could have talked for another 2-3 hours, and I think we're definitely going to do a part 2 because we love deep diving into the minutia. For those of you that love that sort of stuff, this is the episode for you. Without any further ado, here is Kohji Nagata. Hello and welcome. I'm here with Kohji Nagata. Kohji, it's really great to get to chat with you, man.
Yeah, good to chat with you.
I've so I want to, typically I'll start going into kind of people's backgrounds on the podcast, but I want to talk a little bit about our intro and why I was so excited to talk with you. We met up at GDC doing an escape room, or a couple of escape rooms together, I guess, as it turned out. So we got to experience life in the game, and in a situation we got to see how your mind worked quickly, and we started chit chatting about the process of making games. And there was a specific comment that you'd made that made me like absolutely want to have you as a guest on the podcast. And I don't know if you remember what it was, because I think I called it out at the time. Do you remember what that was when I mentioned it?
I have a feeling. I think it was my my feeling towards when I look at the games that I make, the only thing that I see is all of the mistakes, or all the things that I want to improve, or what's left to be done, as opposed to what the product actually is.
Yep, that's exactly it. And your project, which of course we'll get into with with Parallels and other work that you're doing, is like a massive success by any metric. It has a large following of fans. You've accomplished an enormous amount, especially as I've dug, in research kind of for this podcast, digging more into your background. As kind of this, as far as I could tell, this is the first sort of game that you publicly worked on. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so an unbelievable success and accomplishment. But I think that trait, because I feel the exact same way about my games. The comment immediately resonated to me, and I've had career that I can recognize has been very successful, but I am always focused on the things that are wrong. I'm always focused on the stuff that is not up to the standards that I would want them. Where do you think that comes from for you, or how do you kind of channel that energy? Because I see, there's upsides to having that kind of approach. There's also some downsides to my mental health. I've noticed, at least, to having that kind of approach sometimes. So, where do you think that comes from for you? And kind of how do you channel that in your day to day?
I mean, it's hard for me to determine exactly where that comes from. I think that if I had to guess, I would say that's probably something to do with my parents. Um, Only because they've raised me with a healthy or maybe unhealthy amount of fear in my life, and I've also been the type of person who's never gone without a job. The longest I've ever not worked for is like a couple weeks, and that was only because I had another job lined up. And and I mentioned that only because I think they just drilled into me that like uh, you got to work hard, and you always kind of have to be on top of your game. And I think part of that bleeds over into this. And then another thing that my dad was really big on was like quality. He was like, look, it doesn't matter uh, what things cost necessarily. You get the best version of that thing if it is actually the best, and not just price wise, but like the thing that's going to last forever, that's going to provide the most entertainment, et cetera. And those two things smashed together is like leads me to like I got to work hard at the job that I do, and I got to make the best version of that thing. And when I look at it, if I don't see the best version, which inevitably you probably never will, it is motivation for me to just keep pushing harder and trying to make it better. Now, you mentioned the mental health part of it, and I do think that there's a bit of an issue with it sometimes because it's impossible to slow down when you think that way. You
Yeah,
want to just keep pushing.
yeah, and I think I appreciate you sharing kind of that backstory, because for me it definitely comes down to absolutely comes from my parents, right? It comes from my sort of early on. I was praised not just for sort of hard work, but for like being successful, right, or being the best at what I was doing. And on the one side, that chasing after that sort of, okay, well, you've got to be number one, you've got to be at the top of the class, you've got to be at the thing, uh, of course, push me to success. But then it also creates this feeling of, when I don't hit that, when I'm not obviously at the top, or I make a mistake, or it doesn't quite achieve it, then that this like feeling of not enoughness, right? This feeling like I'm failing, and that's not okay. And I have had, and I owe a lot of success to that, so I can't like write it off. But I have worked over time, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, to really shift that mindset some, to especially appreciating, because I've learned to appreciate the failures more than anything else, right? And maybe this will resonate with you, where it's like the times where I've made the biggest mistakes, the times where I have had the life punch me in the face, are the times where I've actually gotten to learn the most, and I've gotten to grow the most, and then new opportunities and capabilities that I would never have imagined before were now possible because of that, and it wouldn't have been possible if not for that. And so it's sort of shifted my mindset around kind of failure and mistake as less about me being bad or not okay or not enough, and more about that's just sort of the process, and it's got to be okay, and you have to learn to sort of enjoy that iterative loop, what I call the core design loop, for any creative work. And I don't know if you've encountered this, or if there's stories that come to mind as I kind of share that around key failures or mistakes, or times life punched you in the face that have ended up turning out into this growth opportunity.
Oh, 100%. I think that like uh, with everything you do, failure is a key element. So a real world example is a lot of the people that I started parallel with, where we started parallel together. We worked at a previous company. Now, that company did well, and we operated for a while, but we made some mistakes. Then eventually, the company folded, right? And we learned a lot doing that. One was how to work together as a team. We obviously solidified our relationship such that when the opportunity arose to do something again, we were all ready to go and work together. But we also learned sort of like uh, how to deal with success, I suppose. I have a hard time even saying success because like I don't know, like we do okay, but like anyway, whatever. How to deal with success? It's just like good times aren't good times forever, and until you're there, it's hard to when things are on the up, you're like, oh, okay, like you start projecting models where it's like, okay, if we stay at this level of revenue, and if we do this and we do that, like, okay, we'll survive forever, right? But then you kind of fail to take into account uh, the extent to which the market can shift, or just powers outside of your own can shift things and that you don't have any control over. That make it very hard to operate. And so this time around, we learned a lot of lessons about operating a business with a healthy amount of runway, so that when things take a turn, we're totally fine.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because I want to get really practical and granular here because I think listen, we're recording this conversation. For context, this week is the 15th anniversary of my company, Stoneblade Entertainment. We've recently most of that business for most of that history has been a tabletop business that has been solid and consistent over many years, and now we just got hit with tariffs that may or may not last that are threatening that side of the business. Market conditions are up and down, and with the on the crypto sides of the business and the digital side
Sure.
with Soulforge Fusion. So all of these things are now, many people out there in the world, I'm sure, are facing these kinds of fears, these kinds of threats, and so this operating a business with sufficient runway and capital, like what does that mean to you? How do you operate to do that? I know you guys have done several fundraising rounds. Like we can get into various degrees of this, but like in terms of like distilled principles of saying, okay, I know how to deal with success, which you immediately turn to. I know how to deal with the fact that success is not guaranteed. Or what one
Yeah,
of my mantras is cultivating comfort with uncertainty and impermanence. That you just have to be okay with this case. How do you deal with that? Like how do you recommend others deal with that or prepare to deal with that even if they're not in that condition right now?
I mean, I would, at a very base level, I would just say, think about what the worst case scenario is. Like, uh, a lot of the projections that we do as a company are, even though we continue to sell things, the games, the products are monetized, what have you. We look at our runway whenever we get together and discuss things. The first number we look at is, if we made no more money starting today, what is our operating runway, right? And then you look at that and you're like, okay, would I feel comfortable with that? You know, not like, obviously, if you're doing things right, there's still going to be money coming in over time and what have you. But like, just look at it as if we had nothing left, or it all failed tomorrow. How long could we operate? And if you're comfortable with that number, then everything else is kind of gravy, right? And then you're like, oh wait, this is like less crazy than I would have thought, right? And I think that's like number one. And then number two is just kind of being very realistic about um, how do I put this? Like putting some variance into whatever projections you have. So even assuming things are steady, that's fine. A lot of people like to base their numbers on today, but I would say like give yourself like a 30, 40, 50% swing on either way, and see how that affects your numbers, and just like evaluate all possibilities, because I think that it's really important to keep a very level head about what could possibly happen, right? Because we're seeing it now. Like so many companies, I'm sure, um, did not anticipate the tariff thing being what it would be. And I don't mean in Web3, I just mean in business in general. And now they have to drastically sort of adjust their approach, right? And so I think that like if you have the worst case scenario in mind, then you're less scared when things like this happen.
All right, I'm going to push on this on a couple levels here because I think it's a really interesting discussion. Right, one, you said that if your calculus in terms of safe runway is assuming no revenue comes in, are you comfortable with that number? That's a very emotional response. Is there a number behind that? That's like what's your comfort level, if you don't mind saying, or is it literally just a gut like, okay, I'm happy to run on a 30-day runway, or I need 3 years of runway? It's just an emotional thing.
uh, it's very hard to say, honestly. Like I don't pretend to be the business expert, and in fact, Parallel was started with five of my other friends, and each one of us has our own specialty, and I just happen to be the game guy. So like, there's probably someone on the more business end that would say, I feel comfortable with this, but like, our rule of thumb has always been like year and a half to 2 years is
Got it.
like where we like to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And then I think that that's a very like conservative, I think, way to approach these things. And for some people, they may not be privileged enough to have that level, right? You have to just kind of start where you
Yeah,
start.
of
And
course, of
yeah,
course.
but I think it's like great to see that, and it makes a big difference, right? Because there's a different philosophy in, especially big tech, where it's not about like conserving your runway and building for the long term, but it's about growing and scaling as fast as you can, right? And that philosophy is going to have a trade off against the more conservative, slower growth, slower, less manager overhead. I'm definitely more on that side. That there is nothing worse than going and overextending and realizing you now have to lay people off and cut back and put yourself into a very tough situation. So I do think that I do think it is an emotional question, to be honest, even more than it is a business question to some degree. It's like, what's your tolerance for risk? What's your, what's most important to you? And I think building that level of emotional cushion for whatever your personal psychic makeup is, and your company philosophy is really important.
I mean, I guess I would agree now that I think about it, because like I was very hesitant to say it's an emotional decision, but I think that it is. But I think I would also put the caveat that if your emotional tolerance for failure is like a month and a half of runway, uh, you're probably not the guy that should be determining whether or not you have enough runway. You know what I'm saying? Like, fortune does favor the bold, but there's also like there's bold and there's just like silly, and so I think that you have to also be willing to be brutally honest with yourself when you're evaluating some of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, being honest with what, sort of, knowing where you are, knowing your own sort of makeup and not deluding yourself. That's the hardest part when you're in these situations, right? Like, it's like you
Exactly. Yes.
just
Yes.
think
Yeah.
that I'm going to have things are going to turn around, or I'm going to have this absurd growth and everything will be fine. It's very hard when you're in the middle of it, right? You're in the thick of the thing, to see as clearly as you need to. So that's an important skill for running a business like this. Um, I'll pivot a little bit here because I think, as you mentioned, you're the game guy, but I do think gaming and business are a lot overlapped, right? The same models that we use to both design games and play games, I think, apply very much to business. But um, I want to talk about how you became the game guy, because the background stories. I know that you have a background in playing TCGs, but all of your professional background was generally in tech and some podcasting and things like that. So like, maybe we can give a kind of a short version of the story of like what made you decide to get to making a digital TCG and going heading down this road.
Sure. I think the big thing is I've been an amateur game designer for a while. I used to host. And if any of the listeners are familiar with a website called Meetup, I used to host meetups. Um, there was a meetup down the street from when I used to live in a condo, down the street from my condo at a board game shop. That board game shop unfortunately had to close down, and so for whatever reason, I was like, who cares? Let's just move the meetup to my place. And it ended up being we had like 3 tables with like 20 some odd people every week coming to my place. And uh, I remember one day somebody brought their own game, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I've been tinkering with this, but I didn't really think of this space as a place to like put that out in the world. And so then I became obsessive about trying to make board games. And so I think that when my buddies, when we all got together, we decided to make a game, and then we went down the Web3 route. Uh, it was natural to me to want to do a card game, because I mean that most closely emulates the tabletop style of gameplay, which I am sort of uh, more gravitate towards. And then it also lends itself to the tech and what have you. But I spent a lot of time prototyping bizarre, mostly terrible board games. And then, yeah, I guess when this opportunity arose, I just had an idea for a card game, and it was somewhere in between the games that I love. I used to be a musician as well, and one of the things that you do when you're a musician, or at least I think everybody does, really, is just like you take your favorite elements of all the bands that you love, you try and smash it together and make your own style. And that's essentially what I tried to do with Parallel, which is like take all of the elements of the card games that I love, smash them together and make something interesting. And also I was designing with myself in mind. It's just like, what would I find fun? You know? I think a lot of people when they enter into this, and maybe they're like better at it than I'm not exactly sure, but they enter into it with the idea of like, what would the people quote unquote like? And it's just like, I can't design that way. If it's fun for me, I just hope that there are enough people who think the same way that I do and want to play the game that I made.
Yeah. So yeah, your background and process reinforces a lot of lessons that I talk about a lot, and that other guests have talked about. Right? You had a passion that you didn't get paid for. Right? You were just hosting meetups for games, and then when you saw the prospect of building games, you got obsessed with it. You were curious about the thing, you got obsessed with it, and then you designed for yourself, right? Something that you would know to love, because it's the easiest way to know if you're succeeding or not. And I've definitely found that to be the case. And that when you're getting started, the idea, like creativity, in many ways is theft, but hiding your sources a bit, right? You're taking multiple different things, smashing them together. I noticed a lot of the cleanliness in your design that I appreciate, because that is, I think, a common problem with newer designers, is that they smash things together, but they forget to cut things out, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
one of the most important things. And I think you've taken that to heart. It's like, okay, what can I get rid of here? How do I streamline things? And if you were going to pitch, because we have a lot of TCG players, and there are a lot of TCGs in the market, a lot of TCG players in our audience, a lot of TCGs in the market. But if you were going to make a kind of pitch to what does Parallel combine, and what does Parallel streamline to that audience, what would you say?
What does it combine? I mean, I think it combines the uh, some elements of strategy that Magic the Gathering provides. I'm a huge, I cut my teeth playing Magic the Gathering. I do think that like for an online environment, the sort of constant stoppage and play that Magic requires makes it a little bit more complicated. But it does allow for some interesting interactions. So we tried to incorporate some sort of like play on the other player's turn, that sort of thing. Um, and then uh, I like the streamlined nature of Hearthstone's mana system, so that you knew you were guaranteed one a turn, and that allow you to plan your deck accordingly. Um, but then sort of smashing that stuff together, so that like the big thing for me is our banking system. That's kind of where the game started. Is you could take any card in your hand and turn it into mana, for lack of a better term. So unlike Magic, you didn't have to draw the mana, but unlike Hearthstone, you weren't just given it; you were like given a choice. And then we turn that mana area, which we call the bank, we turn that bank into a separate play area. So rather than just having a hand, a discard pile, and like a play field, you had another area that you could interact with and do strange things with. And I think like Magic kind of dipped their toe in there a little bit, but they maybe were. I hesitate to use the term hamstrung by their design, because I think like their design is like as amazing as it can get. But like in the modern era, in the digital age, people are looking for something slightly more fast paced. So we tried to make it a little faster, a little bit but still in the competitive sphere. I don't know. I'm like talking in a million directions at once, because like I just feel like we just pulled all of these parts. And to your
No,
point, like there's a bunch of stuff that we put in there that we were like, oh no, this isn't going to work. Just knowing, because it's a little too messy, or we're trying to do too much, or whatever.
yeah. Okay. So we're gonna get deep into the weeds here. So this is gonna be I like how we kind of started, very big, and kind of philosophies around business and success and fear and managing a bankroll. Now we're gonna get
Yeah.
really really in the weeds and TCG mechanics, because you and I are some of the few people in the world that I think really enjoy geeking out on this stuff. But we're gonna the people that are listening, I know, are gonna love this. So when we are working on a system, because obviously Magic started the whole genre. Obviously, I work with Richard regularly with Soulforge Fusion. We've talked a lot about these systems as well. And did you play the Versus system back in the day at all? The
Yep.
Marvel
Yeah. Yeah.
DC? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so this was
I have
one.
some unopened packs back there. By the way.
Love it. Love
Yeah.
it. So that's where I cut my teeth as a designer, right? Those were the first kind of projects I worked on. The Infinite Crisis expansion was my first full lead design.
Oh, amazing.
But the system was one of the first to try to do the same thing. Everyone who was a pro Magic player, everyone who's played Magic, frankly, at all, has had this feeling that, oh, the mana system is awesome, but also it's terrible. right? And the
Yeah.
feeling is like I don't have the reliability because I could get, if I don't get enough mana, then I can't play the game at all. If I get too much mana, then the game is boring, right? So there's like this problem, quote unquote, that people want to solve. And we have now approached this in a variety of different ways to solve it. And it's probably like the heart of most TCG variation has been the how do you solve this problem and what new problems come out of it. So I'll say from the versus system, since I think this is one of the ones that it's very similar to what you described. In this case, you would draw 2 cards turn. You could place any one card face down to be your resource, and then of course you could play the cards throughout the turn. And the one of the things that did is it made it so that instead of getting the term mana screwed is the common phraseology from Magic, where you just didn't get enough mana or mana flooded if you got too many. Instead of having that problem, what actually mattered was how much were you able to optimize the use of those resources in any given turn, right? So if I didn't draw the right cost curve, if it's I have 4 resources this turn, but the only card in my hand is a 3 cost card or a 5 cost card, now that's my new version. We just introduced a new, more hidden version of mana screw or mana flood. And so and there was similarly, so I'll pause there because that's one challenge. Do you find that how do you view that in terms of parallels and that new kind of obfuscation of the same problem?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, it was it was more about giving people more choice, I suppose. Like
Sure.
having, we did a very similar thing, except you draw 1 card and then another card at the end of your turn if you banked a card in parallel. But having to decide, like just the idea that you draw a hand of cards that you wanted to keep, like you wanted all the cards in your hand, but you had to pick one, or else you'd be behind the curve, was like very interesting to me. I knew that it was, at least there was a nugget of something there, because when I first tested the idea, I was like, this frustrates me. And when I get frustrated playing a game in like an exciting way, not like I hit a dead end, but like, oh, I wish I could do this, but I can't. Um, it, it sparks something in me to like sort of push forward. So I think that like, it was more intuition than it was like me attempting to necessarily solve the, like I mentioned this earlier, but I feel like Hearthstone somewhat solved the mana issue. Like obviously in a card game, you want there to be variance, you want there to be some element of randomness. That's why we're dealing with cards, right? Because they can be shuffled.
Right.
But I think that like Magic's land system was too much variance. But then I also think that Hearthstone's mana system maybe led itself to too much predictability, or at least making meta decks a little bit easier. I don't even know, something along those lines. But so then that's where I kind of walked towards where we ended up. And of course, like our system isn't perfect either. I think that like what we've done, for better or worse, in my opinion, maybe slightly for better, because most of our games are best of one, but like allow you to throw in a bunch of silver bullets that you would otherwise maybe not do if you had to construct your deck a little more cost effectively. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I hope I answered the question.
No. Listen, and like I said, like we're gonna spend a decent chunk of time here going deep, and then for those that don't care about TCG mechanics, I promise we're gonna get to some other really interesting other questions. But like, not a lot of people I can have this conversation with. I think for some people they're gonna love it, and I love it, so whatever. Haha, everybody has to listen. No, because you mentioned a couple principles that are really important that apply to any game. One is the idea of the core tension. Right. So, like, this is something I talk about all the time. Like, my job as a designer is to frustrate the players, right? I am trying to put these blocks and walls in your way. One of my favorite definitions of games in general is the voluntary acceptance of unnecessary obstacles. Like, right, I purposefully take on these inefficient ways I have to do things because it creates these tensions for me, and the ability to relieve that tension either through making a good decision and succeeding, or not, or getting unlucky and not succeeding, or whatever. That's where a lot of the excitement and learning and fun of games comes from. So you've created these interesting tension moments here, and that drove your decision tree. And so I think there's no perfect answer here, but there's like, I'll explore this from the context of our 2 games, right? We've got 2, digital Web3 TCGs. So with Parallels, every turn you're drawing a card. You have the option to kind of get rid of that card, bank that card, to then be able to turn that into a resource. That's a very high strategy, high tension decision. Almost any game that is going to have discard any card for a resource, or exchange, cycle a card, in this case get rid of a card for a resource, is going to create a higher skill testing environment, and it's going to create a higher tension environment. And so there are other games that are not TCGs that you can learn this from, like Race for the Galaxy has a lot of this tension, right? Where you're going to like every card I want to play, I have to discard cards from my hand, creates a enormous amount of tension, enormous amount of difficult decision making, brain, and a lot of can lead to brain, kind of paralysis for some players, can be super exciting for others. And then whereas like in Soulforge Fusion, we built it so that we got rid of the mana system entirely. We built a version where you can play any card out of your hand, and then we build the resource system is built into leveling of cards, right? So the cards I play now get better a bit when I play them. The ones I don't play don't get better. And so the ratio of which cards you choose to evolve and how will those cards evolve hides the resource system in a sense, right? If you're just a casual player, you just play cards and go, and then it creates more strategy. And both of our games do the other thing that I wanted to circle back to, which I think is really important, is that both our games allow what you mentioned as silver bullets to be more prevalent. And so, and silver bullets, for those that aren't familiar, right? The idea in a trading card game, you're trying to create, having some cards that are really, really good against a narrow subset of strategies, but otherwise wouldn't be up to par. And in a game like Magic, they have to have multiple 2 out of 3 matches with a sideboard where you can bring those cards in the right match, because having a dead draw in a game like Magic is crushing, whereas a dead draw in a game like Parallels or in Soulforge Fusion is not as big a deal. And so there's an interesting trade-off there in terms of how it evolves the game over time. So I forgive me because I'm not sure, like your game's been around for I think about 3 years now, 4 years.
Well, we've been working on it for about that long, but as far as like as long as people have been able to play it, it's probably closer to like 2 or 3 years.
Okay, so you've had a massive amount of growth in 2 or 3 years. How many releases or cards have you put out? In, I guess, either question or both, if you have the answer top of mind.
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so we've had 2 expansions, and then the core set. The core set was like 300 some odd cards, and then each expansion's been 100 something or 200. I honestly, okay, like the problem is, and maybe people who are listening to this don't know. I'm sure you know those. Like we're now like 2 expansions ahead in our design, so it's hard for me to keep track of how many cards and what we've released and what we haven't. Just because I'm thinking like, a year down the line or whatever. So forgive me, anyone, if I get this stuff wrong, but I believe, it's we have the game and 2 expansions at this point, or maybe we're about to release the second expansion. Man,
well, it's all good.
Yeah.
This does, you highlighted a very real problem as a game designer. Is like, not only do I not know like what's, generally speaking, like what's live now versus what's not, or it's a real problem because I'm so future in the design, but also card names are the biggest problem. People are like, oh man, what do you think about this card? I'm like, oh man, they were not called that in playtesting. I don't remember what they actually were. Like, that's not the card. You're gonna have to tell me the text, and then I can
that's incredible. Yeah, it's placeholder. It's always placeholder titles, and for me, like, I'm people are always mentioning card names, like rattling them off. It's almost the equivalent of an actor, getting like in episode 3 of season 5, like you did this, and it's just like, I don't know, man. But if you give me the function or you show me the picture, I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, exactly. I literally just had this. Somebody's like, because we just, for Ascension, we're also celebrating our 15-year anniversary of Ascension this year, and I've been getting a lot. We've putting all of our back catalog back into print. So all of the old sets are back, and people can get them after a decade of that not being true. And so now I'm getting all of these questions from fans of like card interactions between like one set from year 3 and this other card from year 7. And I was like, you got to show me those cards, man. I don't know what's happening anymore. So good problem to have, but funny. Only inside baseball here that designers have this problem. I'm gonna shift topics so that we can zoom out of the weeds of TCG resource mechanics. Even though I love the stuff, and again, hopefully for those that are like in the space designing it, you can see these different kinds of trade-offs. It's not like a right or wrong answer. There's like a variance versus simplicity versus all the different trade-offs of like what type. And so this is where like knowing who your audience is and who you're appealing to really matters, right? And your personal tastes lead you toward in a certain direction, and there's enough people that follow that direction, it's great. But you're not going to appeal to the same audience as is going to be like a Hearthstone or a Marvel Snap, who are looking for something that's much faster and lighter and sort of what's my minimal like decision complexity that makes this feel interesting, or minimal complexity to get to interesting decisions. So to zoom back out, I want to talk about Web3 for a little while. I want to talk about the choices there and how that influences your design. And then I want to talk about AI after that. But so we're going to get to the more controversial topics from game design space. But let's talk about Web3. We can relatively quickly go into the why Web3 question, because that's been answered a ton and we've talked about it a ton in the podcast. But how does it affect your design? How do you think about game interaction with NFT collecting and token economy and things like that?
Oh man, I mean that's a loaded question, I think. Okay, so how does it affect the design? It depends on the. I mean, if we're talking strictly about the card game, it doesn't really affect the design too much, because one of the reasons I chose a card game, and one of the reasons I love card games and I love the Web3 element of it, is because I love the idea that I grew up as a kid going to the card store and just thinking to myself, like, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if I could get that Time Walk or whatever. Black Lotus is probably the better example people will know. Looking in the glass case. And I think that like what Web3 allows is like the digital glass case, right? It's like fun for people to look at their collection. And I used to buy like Scry magazine and look up the prices of all my stuff every month and be like, oh, like my collection's worth this much or that much or whatever. And I'd never sell it. But of course, like that was just something that I was obsessed with. So I love the idea of like bringing that sort of excitement to the digital space, and not just like having rarity in a sense that like a card is harder to pull from a pack. Like, and no shade to Hearthstone, I love Hearthstone, but the idea that like the rarity just dictates how often you might pull it from a pack when you're buying packs from them, as opposed to like how many are in the actual circulating supply. Because like it seems a little disingenuous to just be like, okay, you give me money and then you get to pull the slot machine handle, and whatever comes out you can use in the game, but it's not actually yours.
Right.
That sort of thing like kind of drove me crazy. So that's one piece of it. But as far as like designing for Web3, I think that like it's very difficult, especially when you have a token live, which we do, to make sure that you're kind of keeping things in order, because obviously the game also emits prime if you're an NFT holder, and then having to design a game that allows for that to happen without the fear of cheating and things like that are an issue. And then of course it's also just like you're playing another like you're adding another level of design to the whole pie, because now it's not just gamers and potential collectors. You also got these like flippers in the mix, and to ignore them, to be like, oh, these guys are a plague, they shouldn't be here, so I'm not going to design anything for them, is like you're putting blinders on. You have to kind of design a game that works for the gamers, design a game that works for the collectors, and design a little something to keep the flippers busy so they're not like running rampant in your ecosystem or whatever. And so it's just another level of thing to consider, really.
Yeah. So that's the level I want to get into. Not I understand, not necessarily like how it affects the TCG design, but you have to you're game designing an entire ecosystem. So let's start with the first piece. I love the phrase you used, the digital glass case, right? This idea that I can have a collection, and obviously I'm sympathetic to this. We've gone down the same path, right? Like I actually, players actually owning their collection and can get the value out of it, and like it's not just something you're just throwing money down a hole that doesn't ever, you can't ever get it out, or
Yeah.
the you succeed as the game succeeds, like all that stuff I love, right? We're aligned on that. But then what do you do as a designer, or is it how you build the system, or to make that digital glass case experience more compelling or more exciting for players? What do you think is the biggest factors to make that successful, and to help grow that, and either capture that same feeling like you had in the physical glass case and looking at Scry magazine, or even potentially exceed it and find new ways to make that collecting experience exciting?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that it's well, okay. There's two answers to that question. The first one is that probably the reason why we got successful in the first place, which was in the early days of NFT sales. Essentially, you would log onto a website or go onto OpenSea or wherever, and you'd say, this NFT was minting. I want to buy, this NFT. You'd put you connect your wallet somehow, send them some money, and then the NFT would appear in your wallet, and then there'd be like an unveiling period, right? And that's fine, but what we realized was like, okay, we're making a game, and right now we're selling these cards before the game is available. So uh, our experience has to be fun because we don't have a fun game yet. What we need to do is give them a fun experience. And so what we did is, and we continue to do actually, is to put a lot of time and effort into what we call the opening experience. So with us, rather than just buying an NFT and then they would appear in your wallet, essentially what you would do is you'd go to a website, you'd pay for it, and then that would reserve you a pack or however many packs you wanted to buy at the time. And then we would tell you to come back to the website at a given time. And when you came back, there was like a whole cinematic experience that you had. And then a very visual experience where your cards would be revealed to you one at a time in each pack. So you could, see where you got the rare pulls, all this stuff. But even before the cards were revealed, there was like this whole thing. One of them, you're running down a field that was like, in the midst of full scale war, and someone airdrops you a package. The package hits the ground and it opens, and then in the package is your cards, right? And then we reveal the cards one by one, and once you've revealed it all, that's when we send you the NFTs, so that like you have that reveal experience, then you get the NFTs. And I think that like especially as early as we were to the whole thing, people that really excited people. And like, this is something I'll never forget till the day I die. We were on our Discord, our very first pack opening experience, and in like a giant group call, and people were just like hooting and hollering and being like, "Oh my god, I pulled this card or I did this," and they were like laughing, and it reminded me very much of when I was like a very young kid opening Magic cards. Like I remember the first time me and my buddy, we split a box of Ice Age, and just ripping those packs open, we were like so excited when we saw certain things. And just to bring that back to people, I think that level of nostalgia hit them in a way that all these other projects hadn't yet captured. And so that worked very well for us. But the other side of that, right, is like when I mentioned the digital glass case, I'm referring to, my local card store is a card store called Face to Face Games. There's a whole bunch of other ones that, every city has their Friday Night Magic locations where you go and but they have their glass cases. But the thing about those glass cases is they aren't owned by Wizards of the Coast, um, or Hasbro or whoever owns the cards now. They're owned by the shop owner. So I think that like if the game is successful enough, it transitions away from. I mean, obviously, our pack opening experiences should still be fun and exciting, but once people have the cards, those glass cases should be curated by them and giving them the tools to be able to show off, potentially sell or trade their cards in an exciting way is kind of important. Right now we're relying on OpenSea, but eventually, perhaps one day once the clients all lock down, we can build our own sort of sell trade platform and bring the same level of excitement that we have in the game outside the game.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that the emphasizing that experience at point of purchase and experience of opening a pack, right? That was for me also the thing I was trying to recapture, right? When I first played Magic, when I first discovered it, I would open up a pack of cards and I would literally have no idea what was in it, right? I just didn't. There was no spoilers and everything back then. Just dating myself a little bit, but like I would just open a pack and be like, "Oh my god, that's a Shivan Dragon. That's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my entire life," or like whatever. I just started imagining what I could do with a Royal Assassin or whatever nonsense.
Oh, that's my favorite card, by the way.
Which one?
Royal Assassin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great, Great card, great design. Yeah, just and again, the dragon is obvious because it's a dragon, it's cool. But the assassin starts to make you think, oh wow, this cool little 1/1 creature can do so much, and it changes the
Yeah,
way you play the game. So I
yeah,
agree
yeah,
with you. And I would get really disappointed every time I opened up a dual land because it was just boring. It's just a land. Little did I know those would be the most valuable cards of the ones I'd open then. But outside of that, the even now the days with spoilers and kind of everything that exists out in the world discovers the cards well ahead of when you even get the pack. um it ruined that a lot, right? So with Soulforge Fusion, we try to solve that by algorithmically generating the packs, so every pack's unique, and there's far more variety of cards that are possible. With your guys is kind of having this airdrop experience, or this kind of the cinematic drop experience, where people couldn't see. Did you preview those cards ahead of time, or this is sometimes these would be like the first times people could see it?
Um, so we would put up on Twitter and in our Discord uh some of the cards, like some of the art, just to like entice people. Obviously, we had was the art to sell it, but we weren't like, here's the entirety of the set.
Right.
We would always save some like real bangers for the pack openings.
Yeah, I think that's great, and that creates that excitement around that moment. And then I think you're right that giving one of the things I love about, I think, the Web3 community that I found is like giving the more tools that you give them, the more stuff they're going to do. So we have fans that have created their own deck ranking system tools and different ways to sort your collection and view things and access, and we give them APIs so they can do that. And so that letting the community take ownership of building that experience, I think is one of the best things about Web3 generally, empowers players and helps them feel more ownership than traditional digital games have been. So I think I want to shift then to, let's talk about the token side of things, because when it comes to your Prime token, first let's explain, like, what is it, how does it work? Let's give people some context in case they're getting lost. Right? I think people understand the idea of an NFT as a digital version of a collectible card, but you have this sort of the more fungible token, and how it works in your ecosystem.
Yeah, so Prime is the refer to it as the gaming token. Obviously, it exists in Web3, so there's like a fluctuating value associated with it. But it essentially, we'll start with what you can do with it. So basically, you can use it on external markets. So like you can buy parallel cards on OpenSea with Prime if you want, and I think maybe Magic Eden as well. Um, you can obviously use it to broker your own internal deals with players as well. But like within the game itself, you can trade it for premium in-game currency. So like the same way that you might put your credit card into a traditional free-to-play game, you could use Prime to buy things in the game, cosmetics, additional packs, etc. You can also use your credit card, by the way, in the game. But the difference with Prime also is that like all of the future games that we are currently building and will build as a studio will also use Prime. So it's kind of like a bigger piece in the ecosystem. There's also certain things that you can buy using Prime outside of the game on our website as well. But the way that it works essentially is you get Prime by earning it, winning in the game. So how does that work? Essentially, you need to own a certain amount of NFTs in your deck in order to start earning Prime. The more NFTs you have in the deck, the higher the yield of Prime. So if your deck is full NFTs, you'd have you'd sort of yield the most Prime. But the calculation is very in depth. It depends on what your rank is, how often you win, how many games you play a week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can potentially earn more. But the game itself is also free to play. So if you don't have any NFT cards, you can play the free to play version. We have what's called apparition cards, which are non NFT cards, but they don't yield you any Prime. So you can think of this as like a very hybrid model. We have like a very Web3 centric part of it on one side, and a very free to play on the other. And your level of, I like to joke that it's like Fight Club or Project Mayhem. Your level of involvement is determined by you. You can kind of just decide how much you want to dip your toes in. But generally speaking, when you start to climb the ladder or win in tournaments, we find that most of those players are going full NFT decks because they want the largest yield. I should also mention that because of the Web3 ecosystem, we have this thing called bonds, which are larger groups that collectively own a bunch of the cards, and there's a built-in system that allows you to borrow cards from those groups, so that if you felt like you wanted to earn prime while playing and you didn't have a full NFT deck, you could borrow the cards that you're missing in your deck to get to the NFT full NFT version. And essentially the way that it works is when the prime that you earn while playing, part of that just goes back to the bond.
And so in this case, you would is this built into the game itself? Like you guys built that tool?
Um, the bond tool.
Yeah.
So it's an external tool, but we did help build it. So like we built it in concert with our foundation, which is called the Echelon Foundation. They're the ones that emit the prime, and it's actually a community led organization. Sorry, I'm like all over the place here, but essentially what happened is when we first started the game, we said that a certain percentage of all the NFT sales would go towards starting this community led organization. Which is what we did. We gave it like some pretty large coffers, and then every year the community elects individuals to run this organization, and that organization is responsible for the emission and maintenance of the Prime token. And so the community basically tells us how they want the token emitted in game. They tell us, what sort of tools they might need. They have money to hire developers to build those tools, but we also, if we're going to be using them in our game, we kind of like help them build some of the tools. And one of the tools that we helped them build was the spawn system, so that people could lend cards to one another, and get something back for it.
Interesting. Okay. So I want to dig in and get in the weeds a little bit here too, right? Because you mentioned a lot of different aspects here. And I think that these are the complexities here matter a lot, right? Because when you're building a game, and this is one of the arguments in many places against building a Web3 game, because if you have a token that is fungible that people can sell and trade and buy, including with your cards, right? It's a lot harder, and if you mess up your game ecosystem, the ramifications are massive and can take down a whole system, right? Even other successful games like Axie Infinity and others have had issues with this, where suddenly the ecosystem goes off the rails, and it can tank and cause a lot of problems. And you can so there's you mentioned, so I kind of want to get into to why you made the decisions you made, and what the details are here. So because the
Absolutely.
NFTs, I need to own the NFTs in order to get Prime at all. So if I don't own the NFTs, I can't earn the currency. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you need to have NFTs in your deck in order to
Okay.
earn the currency while playing. And I
Jen,
mean, ownership is a little bit gray, because, like I said, you could borrow, but
sure. So
yeah.
there's a tool that can see. So either I need to spend money up front, or I need to get connected to this bond system, which presumably there's some kind of restrictions around who can rent what here, or some mechanism for that. But leaving that one aside for a second, because that's an interesting but other deep topic. And so then you've built a system that says, okay, within a given calculation of how much time you've played, what percentage of your deck is NFTs, what your win rate is and ranking is, will then output some formula of like, you earn this much, and you earn it like every game you play, or you earn it like after a certain period of time. Like how does that work?
Yeah, it's in a daily period. I want to say a 24-hour period, but like it starts and ends the same time every day for everybody. And it's based on all those factors, but it's your 5 best games that day.
Interesting.
So there's a calculus, and so the most you could ever sort of get paid out on is those 5 games. And then as far as the prime payouts as a whole, there's a maximum cap. So you get a certain percentage of that massive cap. So if let's just say there's only one person playing that day, they would earn more prime because there's only one person, as
Right.
opposed to whatever, hundreds or
Right. So
thousands.
you're controlling because you need to predict all of these models over time, right? And so you're controlling that by saying, look, in any given 24-hour period, there's only X units that are going to be given out regardless. And the formulas are all just like, how do we divide this amongst the current active player base?
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So that helps some, right? Because I think everybody that's doing this has to have some version of this to protect themselves, right? If it's just like every game you play, you earn a prime. Well, okay, people are just going to play 100 million games, and you're going to bankrupt your economy or whatever. So there are versions of this that you have to deal with these kinds of restrictions.
Of
Do
course,
you
yeah.
find that this counterweights, or do you have other systems to counterweight that being a disincentivizing thing for people to play, right? You made clearly a conscious choice that only your top 5 games matter. So playing more than 5 games, maybe it influences my play, maybe it doesn't. But I also don't get the rewards right away. I only get them later. So there's less of a tight feedback loop. So
Mm-hmm.
are there tools that you've used to try to fight this? And I'll just to give you context, right? So like we in Soulful Fusion, we do this. We have 3 different types of currencies. We have the kind of free to play currency, which we give away quite a bit of, and it's restricted in what you can do with it and how. We have a paid currency, which is in app but stays in app, which is more like a traditional Web 2 game. And then we have our token, which we only give out periodically in events or season rewards. So how do you do that? How do you deal with that in Prime or in Parallels?
Yeah, so it's very similar. We have a few currencies in game that only stay in game. One of them is a more premium currency. The other one is more readily available. And then we have Prime. And Prime is almost like we view it almost like a sweetener, right? It incentivizes people to come back every day and at least play their 5 games. And we found that especially at the top levels, the players who, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like have the dog in them, are they want the best 5 games, right? It's not just enough that they play 5 games, but it's got to be the best 5 games that they can play. But because, I mean, like I said, we view it as a sweetener. It's more like these people should, we try and frame it as if you're getting a reward for doing what you would be doing anyway, which is playing the game. So like we have other reward loops in the game that are more frequent, and like you mentioned, you only find out at the end of the day how much you've gotten. You've got to wait, et cetera, et cetera. But we have like immediate feedback of things like your typical battle passes. We have in-game tournaments with like giant prizes and in-game currency, cosmetics, more card packs, etc. And so like we have those tighter loops that incentivize people to keep playing. But I think that like what Prime does is like a more long-term retention tool, especially the players that find themselves performing really well. They're more incentivized to A, have a full NFT deck, but B, come back regularly and see like, oh, I'm making some more Prime here. I'm making some more Prime here. And we've noticed that a lot of the people earning Prime end up sinking it back into the game, which is what we want to see. And it's more so that they can, the stuff that they're sinking for isn't necessarily any sort of competitive edge. They have access to all the cards that they want. It's more like we have these like little trinkets that you can throw around the board, and so they're like trying to get the rare trinkets. They're trying to get the rare skins, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think to look at Prime as like the main incentivizing factor is probably a mistake. We incentivize our games the same way that any other Web 2 game would be incentivized. It's just that at the end of the day, you also get, or you could uh, opt into getting some, a little something back.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think so there's a couple thoughts here. One, I mean, uh, I would argue that the only reason to have a a Web3 currency in the first place is to be able to incentivize behavior, right? I mean, it's why we have currency. Forget Web3 currencies. Why we have currency, period, right? We want to be able to like incentivize behaviors and like create stores of value that we can then, in theory, use to grow the community. So I kind of want to push back a little bit on this idea that it's like it's just a sweetener. I mean, if it's it feels like it needs to be. It's kind of essential to the model of like what it is that lets people feel like they're able to succeed and earn and attracting people even outside of what there's a million TCGs out there, but the fact that you can earn a currency like this is a big deal.
I mean, I don't disagree with that, but it's almost like I mean, it seems like it's cheapening it to equate it to a gift card, but it's almost like a gift card in that you're sort of capturing value and retaining it in your bubble for the most part,
Right.
right? It's because like it it's actually easier. as a game, as anything really, to give out a token that you've created than it is to give out money. Period.
Sure.
And especially if you've incentivized things correctly, that that token is more likely to be spent within your ecosystem than outside. So I think that like, while I would agree that like people getting something back from playing is certainly an incentive and should be viewed as such. It's also like uh, uh I mean, you shouldn't look at it like your people are getting paid to play either. I think it's more like you're kind of reinforcing their sort of entrenchment into your ecosystem, into your offerings, etc. We find that over a period of time, uh, people stop associating dollar values to cryptocurrencies and just view them on the you know currency number. Like someone being like, "Oh, that's just 2 ETH." ETH could be $5,000, it could be $1,000, and they're just like, oh, whatever, just 2 ETH, doesn't matter, right? They're not equating it to real world money, and I think the same thing happens with some of this stuff. So when you do have exclusive offerings in Prime that are like, okay, well, you can only buy this one skin that only exists for this month, and the only way to get it is if you have Prime. Uh, you know, I think that people are willing to like pull that lever.
Yeah. Okay, I like this. I think that there's a so how much do you find your audience is motivated by these kinds of cosmetic rare things? Is that generally like one of the bigger sinks? Is it just you just put a kind of massive price tag so it's a luxury flex for people? Is it just a rare drop? Like how do you think about, because I found in different TCGs I've seen different metrics in terms of like how much people choose to care and spend on cosmetics versus other items.
Yeah, it depends. Like we've been doing, like we're still in an experimental phase of things. Like some of the cosmetics they don't care about at all, and a couple of them they are really coveted. So like it's really focusing on the ones that people actually want. And obviously, in a card game, card variants are like the cream of the crop. So if you have a version of the card that has alternate art that only a few people have, that's like the most coveted thing you can have in a game, because uh people, you look at the card art more than you look at anything. Even though some of the cosmetics are up on screen the entire game, you're so focused on the cards that uh, so I mean, the answer is it's kind of all over the map. Like, I'll give you an example of some of the cosmetics that have had like sort of middling returns, which is we have heroes in our game, which we call paragons, and you can kind of dress them up in various costumes. And some people, there's certain costumes that people are really into, and then the majority of them people are like, oh, whatever. Like it just sometimes people will switch it up to sort of express themselves, but it's not something that anyone's like actively chasing after. Whereas, like I said, we had these trinkets that you can kind of throw around the field. We call them companions. There's some of them that people are like super, super, super into, especially in competitive play. We saw it in our world championship. This guy Zelly had one, and while it was his opponent's turn, he was just tossing it around the screen, and the audience was laughing, and that really drew people to them. So I think that that's interesting. But of course, like I said, the card variants are the most sort of coveted versions of this, and like there's only a few ways to get them. I think we've had a few that were offered in Prime. Some of them we only give away to contestants of tournaments, so like you had to have made it to a major or whatever to earn some of these variants. And so yeah, I don't know, we're still in the process of like poking and prodding to see where the most Prime sinks. Obviously for us the biggest one is just turning Prime into in-game currency.
Yeah. I think that's yeah, we have a similar model here, and that we found, yeah, of course, people want to buy the in-game currency to get their cool in-game things. We're actually working on our own kind of loot box experience with alternate cosmetics that you can't get elsewhere through that same model.
That's
So
funny that you say that, because we're doing the same thing. We're working on
yeah,
loot boxes as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously I'm digging into the weeds on this, not just from abstract philosophical concerns, but also, yeah, I'm building the same thing. So it's an interesting thing, and I think it's fun to chat about this sort of stuff. And I think
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
let me ask you a question, because I think this is something that we've been messing with. I suspect that certain cosmetics become more coveted in uh, a loot box form than just like a storefront form. When you
Agree.
when you buy a loot box and you make it fun and interesting, that something rare pops out, regardless of whether or not that's like the type of cosmetic that people are interested in, they will become more interested in it because of that experience, as opposed to just being like, here's a rare thing that only exists in the store this month. Um, what's your take on it?
Yeah, strong agree there, right? So kind of exclusivity and rarity are important, and the idea that it's exclusive in the sense that anyone who wants to buy it during this time window does not feel the same way as the like, okay, well, maybe you get it, maybe you don't, or you only top four of this tournament get this thing, right? Now it's a status symbol, right? Or you get this, and again, you can show off like, look how cool, look how lucky I am, look, I got the thing, and this is awesome, right?
Yeah,
There's a much different feel about it. So when I think about cosmetics, a lot of it comes down to like, how visible is this to other players,
yeah,
right? And what does it say about me? It's exactly like fashion, right?
yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's exactly like that. When you see the different business models for games that are like Fortnite, right? They make all of their money on skins and cosmetics, right? Like near 100%. And it's because the game is so much about this social aspect. You're in a room, you're running around with 100 other people, your friends are in the thing, you're chatting, everybody can see you, and it's very visual, very visible, and that's like worth a lot, right? Or
yeah.
games like League of Legends and others make massive portions of their funds this way.
The interesting thing
TCGs,
about Fortnite,
yeah, go ahead.
though, sorry to interrupt. The
Yeah,
interesting thing about Fortnite, though, is they don't use the sort of loot box model. They do those sort of limited run in the store model, and it
right.
seems to like work like for them like crazy.
Yeah. Well, this was moving away from the idea of loot boxes relevant thing,
Right,
because I
right.
think what's important, what's important, and what I was kind of getting at is like where I think like game genre matters, cosmetic type matters, right? So like for example, and TCGs are a lot harder here because there's a lot more, you're less personified generally, right? There's like
Hmm.
your presence in a game is not quite as dramatic. So things that show up on the playmat, or little badges, or your character avatar, obviously is a worthwhile area to do it. But like people are more focused on the field and what's happening, than they are on the peripherals and your character persona, in my experience. And so things like alternate card arts or cool animations or things that don't show up elsewhere, those are more meaningful, I think, in a trading card game. And then I think that because trading card games in particular, the idea of random variance in the thing that you get is built in. I think
Yeah,
a random loot box that gives you stuff that's not just cards but also cosmetics, I think, is going to just be more appealing generally. That's certainly the bet we're making as well.
yeah, yeah. One of the others that I neglected to mention actually that people seem to really like, especially since we've reworked them a little bit, is like we call them field backs, which is essentially like um, uh, what your side of the playmat looks like. You can essentially select different backgrounds like you would your desktop or something, and people seem to be into that idea. So I would agree with you there. Like it's a lot harder to express yourself in a card game. So having card variants, the card backs we have as well is another big one. Having like an interesting or rare card back is something that people seem to enjoy. But yeah, it because of the lack of personification. I mean, unless you wanted to like put a floating hand onto the field and give the player like a glove they could put on or something, like I don't know what you would do.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting model, and puzzle to crack here. I know we're running a little low on time, so I want to make sure we have another meaty topic I kind of promised I would talk about earlier, and I'm interested to talk about, which is AI in the game development process. I know that you had some AI in Parallels itself, but you also announced another game, Colony AI, that you are working on. I'd love to understand how you've used AI to date, how you think about AI, and what is, we can talk a little bit about your new project and what this all means.
Sure. Um, I think that AI is going to. I mean, this isn't even a wild take, obviously, but I think AI is going to change the entire gaming sphere, like like you wouldn't believe. Uh, and I think the biggest thing, so I'll say this: we are building an AI game. We've coined the term 1.5 player game. Essentially, you are like an overseer for your agent who is in a on a planet in a colony. The game itself is called Colony, and you're trying to help them survive, and they're coming to you with their thoughts, questions, etc. You kind of direct them like, oh, maybe you should go mine. They might say to you, hey, Justin's character, cut me in line today. What should I do about it? And you're like, well, give him a piece of your mind or whatever. And then maybe that later affects Justin's willingness to trade with you or what have you. And we're using AI to like build those personalities and um, allowing those personalities to grow based on your input, which I think is interesting. But to go back to AI and gaming and how I feel about it, uh, I think that designing games, it's going to open a new genre of game, which is something that we're trying to do. But what it's really going to revolutionize is sort of prototyping and executing on games. I think is going to be a whole different world, right? Because it I mean, I think we're both old enough to remember you used to have to code websites in Notepad. You would open up a Notepad, you'd like type in all the code, and then you'd rename the file from .text to .html, and you put it up somewhere, and boom, there was your website. Very clunky, very hard to do, very hard to format. And then Adobe came out with Dreamweaver, and you were like, holy shit, like I can just drag and drop stuff and make a beautiful website. I can like create these flash animations and do all this stuff. Insane. And now all you have to do is literally you go to another website. You don't even need a program. You go to another website. It has all these templates. You just drag and drop a few things in, and boom, you got a beautiful looking website, right? And I think that that's what AI is going to do for gaming for the most part. So the barrier to entry isn't going to be, do I have the skills to make a game, but is, do I have a good enough idea to execute on? Is this game actually going to be fun? And I think AI is going to help people do that. I mean, you were already seeing projects like Farcade and a couple others that like allow you to spin up prototypes very, very, very quickly. And I think it's like super exciting, and as far as how we're using AI, I mean, we haven't gone that far down the road of like prototyping games using AI or anything like that. But myself, I'll say certainly if I ever get stuck on an idea, have some sort of writer's block, I go to my good friend ChatGPT and I give it some parameters and say like, hey, can you like help me spark some inspiration here? I'm sure a lot of people use it in a very similar way. And then, of course, like I said, there's calling. And we also have a product called Wayfinder, which is like a natural language model that allows people to navigate the blockchain. It's not even a game, it's a tool. So rather than using like MetaMask or doing whatever, you can be like, hey, buy me some ETH and stake it. Find me a high yield place to stake the stuff for blah, blah, blah. Or if you're a beginner, you can even just ask it like, hey, how do I get this Trump coin that people are talking about or whatever? I mean, I wouldn't buy Trump coin, but you know what I mean.
This is not financial advice. Do not.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, strong agree in general. In fact, I actually just because there's a lot of fear and like uncertainty around AI, but like I think quickly the vibe is shifting generally from like, it's going to take our jobs. What do we do? It's destroying creativity to like, okay, well, this is 100% a super useful tool for creativity. I actually started a new series on my Substack. I think the first one's going live like tomorrow as we're recording this, but it'll be live for anybody listening about how I use AI in my day-to-day work and like with like specific like links to the chats and to the things, because I think you can't really understand its value until you start playing with it. And as a ideation tool, prototyping tool, I think is like right now we're in what I'm calling the golden age for creatives, like this window where your ability as like a tastemaker and ideator and like long-term thinker still has enormous value, and the ability to like the requirements, as you mentioned, the barrier to entry to like get something going and get something out there and build something that you can start testing and iterating on is so much lower than it used to be, and it's continuing to shrink. There is a very likely window, I believe, in the not too distant future where that our unique skill set does get eclipsed. But for right now, I say the next 2 to 5 years, I think was a really great time to be a creative and to be getting started and pushing in this direction.
Yeah, what I'd say, a couple points that I want to like jump on where what off of what you said is like the fear of it taking our jobs. I completely understand, but like stable hand used to be like a viable job that someone had, or even like cell animator, like those things were, and I'm not saying that people still need their horses taken care of, and I'm sure there's still traditional animation being done, but it's just not the same anymore. And I think that like industries will grow and change with this. It's not going to necessarily eradicate jobs, period. Like in the short term, some people might feel some pain, but it's also going to open up a new segment that we haven't even sort of begun to touch. And I also think that I couldn't agree more about, you just need to touch it and see what you can do. Like, so outside of all of this, I'm a giant movie fan, you can't really see it, but there's a whole bunch of shelves up here stacked full of 4K films. Okay. And one of the things that I love doing is going to rep theaters where they show like, they'll screen like, I don't know, Ninja Turtles 2 or Jaws or what have you. And the other day on the weekend, I think I was a little bit bored. So I asked ChatGPT, like, hey, can you help me consolidate listings for all the rep theaters in Toronto? And, within a few hours, it helped me build scrapers for all the website, put together my own website that had ordered listings with filters and whatever. So it was just like a one-stop shop. And everyone who I've shown it to who like loves movies, who's a Torontonian, is like, this is incredible. Like, how did you do this? And all I did was like entered some prompts. And even when I didn't know what to do, like I used to be a programmer by trade, but I'm also very lazy. So I was like, hey, don't tell me the Python code. I don't really care about that. Just give it to me in a Python package that I can execute, you know? And even if you didn't know how to do that, you could say like, okay, well, now that I have this Python script, how do I run it? And it will step you through like step by step. Here's where you download Python. Here's how you do this. Here's how you run a script. And it will teach you how to do all that stuff. And I promise you, you can like build simple tools in a matter of hours. And it's like, it is absolutely eye opening. So I strongly suggest that like, even outside of gaming, if you have an idea, you should try and execute using GPT or something of that nature.
Yeah. The variety of the different tools, ChatGPT is a great starting point. Claude, I find, is a great creative partner in building projects and things around that. I think let's spend a little bit of time, outside of it as a sort of tool for the back end. You talked about this, new types of games that it's creating, and you mentioned the kind of 1.5 player game is the hook that you're building around yours, right? I mean, there have been plenty of games that have done this or some variant of it in the past, right? Civilization will have different personalities and mentors and things that you do impact what happens down the road. And games, whatever, you're from role-playing games like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and others have all like, okay, the choices you make change your alignment
Sure.
and change how characters react with you. AI adds more variety and replayability to that. It adds more nuance to it. It adds more uncertainty to it. Is there more to it than that? Or like, is it just a trend off like, what we try to see with the trend of roguelike kind of games where we just want that more variety and more responsiveness? Or is there something deeper going on here that you
Well,
see that's unlocked?
so there's a couple of things. I think that like it also unlocks more personality and sort of generated personality. So the one thing I would say is like a lot of people took a look at AI and were like, oh, you could just like plug this into an RPG and all the NPCs would just have all this life and whatever. And I'm like, that actually is terrible. No offense to anybody. Like that's the opposite of what you want. If you've ever played Baldur's Gate 3, like all that dialogue is so purposeful and you want it to be a part of a package. That's exactly what you want it to do, right? It's like drive players in certain directions or like have funny quirks or whatever, but like part of it is crafting that story. So just to have an RPG where people prattle on forever is like, essentially my nightmare, especially because I'm a completionist. I want to
Yeah.
hear every line of dialogue, But in a game like what we're trying to build, personality is really important because like the stickiness of the game isn't necessarily even the game loops; it's the attachment to the character, right? So you think of it like a Tamagotchi or something of that nature, or like a pet or a friend, even, right? And so what we're allowing you to do, we don't just assign you a colonist and then we're like go. You kind of start the game by crafting this person's personality. I mean, the flavor is it's like a psych eval form that you're filling out for this person, and then your answers, depending on how wacky they are, spit out this person, and then the decisions you guys make together sort of impact how they'll grow. The ultimate goal is like, as an example, as you increase your science skill, let's just say, your character starts to become a little, for lack of a better term, a little nerdier or a little bit more scientific or whatever. And maybe, your initial creation was this like cool. See, this is how old I am. I want to say like the Fonz or something. Like I don't know what a cool character is these days, but like the slick back greaser, sort of like doesn't care, like James Dean esque. These are all old references. I'm sorry, anyone who's young who's listening, but this like too cool guy, and then you make all these choices and it becomes this like uber nerd. It's like kind of an interesting progression, but you guys are kind of growing together. And what AI does is allow for that unpredictability. And of course, in this game we have a lot of crafting, but we're not constraining the system so by too much anyway. So you can kind of create anything you want, and then the AI sort of assigns it values. Anyone who's familiar with like Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like if you ever played like a homebrew campaign, it's something more akin to that, right? Like you might be like, hey, I want to make a laser gun, and maybe like in your homebrew version of D&D, even though it's medieval, that the dungeon master is like, yeah, sure, you can make a laser gun, and it has like the approximate values of this like crossbow or whatever, right? And so that's kind of what we're trying to do, is allow for these emergent behaviors. And I'll tell a very, very short story, and then we can move on. But one of the things that happened in the game, uh, in our early testing, is a player and its AI weren't getting along with each other, and he just kept hammering the chat with like, "Go do this, go do this, go do this," and the guy just wouldn't. He was like too stressed out. He was at the bar drinking, and the guy just kept going, and eventually the AI just got up, walked to the med bay, and we're like, "What the hell's going on here?" Walks to the med bay, talks to the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Hey, what's going on?" And the AI is like, I'm hearing voices in my head and they won't leave me alone. And we were just like, that's crazy. This is amazing. There's got to be a way to like capitalize on making this even more fun and interesting, but allowing for the behaviors that like even we can't predict. I think it like makes for a very exciting sandbox to build a relationship with an AI.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, you could try this right now as a consumer if you just want to even use ChatGPT or Claude and just say let's play Dungeons and Dragons. Right? Let's play a game, and it will act as a really good dungeon master, like shockingly good. And you could just play your characters or whatever, create your world and participate. So it already has this capability kind of built in to just like play this game with you, and so being able to put that into some version of constraints and kind of overall like systems that help to craft that like good repetitive experience. What's your target like play length for a game, or is this just kind of an infinite world type of game for Colin?
Uh, so as it stands right now, the game is going to be essentially right now we're toying with the idea of like 3 days to a week. There's going to be a loop in which the colony is struck with a disaster. So like an ion storm's on the way, or raiders are about to raid the camp, or whatever. And you have to like fortify yourself against these particular disasters to avoid dying. Um, so it's you and the other people in your colony sort of banding together to get the requirements of the stuff. And as you do that, you progress your character, and as your character progresses, you hit certain milestones, and those milestones allow for permanent upgrades. And essentially, as soon as you fail uh, one of the challenges, your colony gets wiped out. You got to start again, but you get to keep some of the permanent upgrades. So the next time around, you have you're better at crafting, or you're better at fighting, or what have you. And some of your avatar's knowledge will be carried forward. So like if you figured out how to make this really amazing I don't know, cyber sphere spear or something, right? Like you can recraft that spear very quickly without having to do all of the research and what have you. So like our play time is, I mean, like, again, it's a 1.5 player game. So basically you're like checking in here and there. It's almost like looking at a fish tank throughout the day, and it'll ping you on your phone as well to be like, hey, I found this thing. What do you want me to do, etc. But like, uh, again, your level of involvement will be sort of determined by you. You kind of just decide how much you want to poke and prod this guy, or how little. But like the sort of you know game loops, the peril will happen every like 3 days to a week.
Got it. Interesting. So there's it's yeah. So this idea that there's a sort of like time based, like the world is moving on with you there or not, and you could choose to interact and like poke at the system as much as you want or not, and eventually, maybe it'll die off if you don't do anything, but otherwise it's gonna. So it is really this Tamagotchi support, like little character thing, is really
Yeah,
almost the
yeah.
model of it.
I mean, we kind of joke around that we want you to fall in love with the character, and then we just want to put them in danger.
Mm.
So I'm a sadist, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a good motivating tool. I'm gonna make you really care about someone, and I'm gonna put them in danger. Is a good way to get people to get people to act. You're talking about motivating behaviors. That's about the strongest one there is. So, absolutely fascinating. When is the expectation that people can play this game?
Um, it's hard to say. I will say that like we're aiming for monthly play tests right now. We had one recently a couple weeks ago, and we're slowly letting more and more people in to test some new features, work out some of the bugs, etc. But I suspect by sometime next year, people will openly be able to get their hands on it, if not sooner.
Okay, well, I'm intrigued. I want to get in on one of these playtests at some point because this sounds like a fascinating, and I love pushing forward the boundaries of what is possible in game design based on where technology allows us to be. It's what brought me to Web3 in the first place. It's why I think I'm mostly bullish on AI and excited about what's possible. So it's cool to see you pushing that boundary as well. Lots of fun stuff. So. Yes, I mean, I could keep going forever, but we're running out of time. So I want to make sure for people that do care about either this new project or want to check out Parallels or other things that you're working on and learn about you more, where's the best place to direct them? What's the cool stuff where can they find your cool stuff?
Yeah. The website is parallel.life. I would say you could go there. Definitely check out our Discord. You can follow us on Twitter at Parallel TCG is sort of like the biggest account. And then I'm at Parallel TCG Pod. I will say about the Twitter part of it, we joke in our company, but it's not really a joke, that sometimes things end up on Twitter before they end up in our Slack. So if you really want to be on the cutting edge, you should just definitely follow the company's Twitter account, because we are the epitome of develop out in the open. I would say that like 90% of what we do is very, very public. And then there's like another 10% that we're sort of like pushing around behind the scenes. But like, yeah, we are, we lay it all out there, for better or worse. And it's kind of funny because like, and I think you'll appreciate this as like a veteran of the gaming industry. A lot of the veterans that we've hired over the years to come work for us, at first they're like, whoa, we can't make this public. We can't put this on the internet. We can't do whatever. And it takes them a while to get used to the idea that we're putting like a bunch of unfinished stuff out into the world. But yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how we do. It's what got us here. And so that's what we're going to continue to do.
Oh, I thought I admit it. Hold on, because I remember I saw you had an X post that was just about this, like today. It's like, what they say, build in the open, what they want, consumer ready, error-free product with closed release, so I can flex my access on the timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting.
It's not without its frustrations for sure. But I will say this, like from a pure game design perspective, you will never get better feedback than you will when you put it out into the world like this. And I don't mean like the individual pieces of feedback. You can whatever, but you can gauge sentiment very quickly as to whether or not you have something interesting based on the level and fervor of that feedback, right?
Yes. Yeah. No. I mean, not. The fervor is really the key here, right? Like the people, like even people that are saying things that like are clearly wrong and not actually productive, but they care a lot, is really important, right? Like a lot of you put stuff out there, and people won't say much of anything, and then you're really in trouble, right? Like that's where the real problem is. So I am a believer in building out in the open. I'm a believer in sharing principles. Is why I do the podcast and everything. Where I don't really hide very much. I think understanding how to manage your messaging and how to manage the feedback. We could do a whole other podcast just on that, I'm sure. And you know what, dude, I would love to at least commit to doing that again, because I think this was super fun, and there's like a million topics that we've like only tangentially touched on that I would love to deep dive in. But thank you for taking the time, man. This was super fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully I'm not all over the place. I will say, to just like bring it all back around, because you were asking me about my beginnings. I used to be a kid who never finished my sentences because I figured people understood what I was trying to say already, and I was ready to move on. So my mind just like, that's how it works back here. So if ever I'm explaining something to the audience here and it's confusing to them, I'm sorry, but like I'm trying to slow it down.
No. I think you did great. And again, my job as a host, is to help where there's areas where there's a hanging bit to kind of bring it together. So if there was any problems, then that's on me. But I enjoyed it. You put out a lot of really interesting threads and gave me opportunities to deep dive into a lot of fun topics, which I am quite confident there'll be a portion of the audience that's not listening at this point anymore because we got too in the weeds, but there's a portion of the audience that absolutely will have loved the detail and the level of thought that you put into so many things, as I do. And so I have no doubts you've added a ton of value here today.
Those are my people, the people who love to get in the weeds. I'm into that. Anyway, thank you for having me. I'd love to come back.
Awesome. All right. Well, then I'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you want to support the podcast, please rate, comment, and share on your favorite podcast platforms, such as iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever device you're listening on. Listener reviews and shares make a huge difference and help us grow this community, and will allow me to bring more amazing guests and insights to you. I've taken the insights from these interviews along with my 20 years of experience in the game industry and compressed it all into a book with the same title as this podcast, Think Like a Game Designer. In it, I give step-by-step instructions on how to apply the lessons from these great designers and bring your own games to life. If you think you might be interested, you can check out the book at thinklikeagamedesigner.com or wherever fine books are sold.